Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. We are here in our 9th web session of the Fall 2021 XAPI cohort. We're excited to have you here with us, and feel free to introduce yourselves in your pronouns in chat, what you prefer to be called and what organization you're with. If you're on social media and you're on Twitter, feel free to use the hashtag XAPI cohort and tag the gnome and our speaker today to talk about today's session. We are officially in week 9. And as a reminder, we are recording this web session because cohort is a join as you can, where you are experience. And we want to make sure folks that are not able to attend this web session live today have access to all of the information that we're sharing. And we cannot wait to share that out. So just as a reminder, today is recorded. And we can go to the next slide. Today, we're gonna share a presentation by Sae, and she is sharing about XAPI and Friends, how the standard fits into the larger learning ecosystem. And we are officially at almost 600 folks registered for the Fall 2021 XAPI cohort, which is very exciting. All-time registration has been around 4,000 individuals, and you have access to most of those people in our Slack channel. So feel free to connect, and welcome to all of our newcomers. That's about 15 more people than we had last week. So we are still attracting more folks to join the cohort. Today, behind the scenes, we have Megan Torrance, who is co-hosting with me, and I have been up until this point your XAPI cohort host. And today I am going to announce that we are going to have a little bit of transition. As you might know or you might not know, I've been doing a lot of racial equity work with Torrance Learning, and we've picked up some momentum there. And I'll be shifting some of my priorities and being able to dive into that work while Megan picks up XAPI cohort and will be able to host for the remainder of the semester. So welcome, Megan, and we're really excited to have this transition for everyone. And then Jamie is, of course, our producer behind the scenes that will help with any technical support that you might need. So if you have any questions, feel free to put those in chat and direct them towards Jamie. With that, I'm going to pass the mic over to you, Megan. I think you're on mute, Megan.
There we go.
Better.
Okay.
Better.
So you are never too late to cohort. That's one of the kind of the cool crystallizing concepts here. It means that we are constantly adding new people to cohort, welcoming new people into the community, and making this a safe space to learn. And that's something that's been important to me about XAPI since we started this learning cohort back in 2015. So this is our 13th cohort right now. And the whole vibe of cohort really is that safe, welcoming space where newcomers and experts can interact together without that scary barrier of not knowing what you're doing. So XAPI Learning Cohort is as free and open source as the specification itself. It's online, it's vendor neutral, but also vendor supported. So it's a safe space not to feel like you're going to be pitched to constantly. At the same time, a lot of vendors have offered free or extended trials of their products and support of what they're building or what they're offering for people in the cohort to help people get up to speed. We have weekly web sessions. That's where we are here today, 2 to 3 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. And as Jess said, we're recording these. And then we have project teams that self-organize in our Slack channel, use the GitHub repository to store their files and their weekly updates, and work together on a schedule that makes sense for them. And I'm always excited to see the projects that are happening in the project teams. So it allows you a lot of different ways to connect and engage. And then we have weekly emails. And quite honestly, there's a bunch of people who join cohort just because the great content in the weekly emails, the session recordings, and the PowerPoint decks, including today's deck that you will get for Sae's session today. So every cohort has an arc of the curriculum, the experience. So we start with, what is XAPI? What is the cohort? How do I send data? Then we start talking about, how do I receive data, and how does that fit into my larger data ecosystem? We then start talking about issues with dealing with data, talking about ethics and CMI5 and the possibilities of using XAPI for AI. And today, whoops, I have my today arrow in the wrong spot. I'm ahead of myself. Today, we are working here. I'm actually extremely excited to have Dr. Sae Schatz joining us today to talk about how the XAPI specification fits into a larger ecosystem of much bigger, cooler things that are going on. Next week, Izzy Lara is going to join us. So Izzy first met us here in the XAPI cohort, and he's going to actually deliver the presentation he brought to DevLearn last week on data governance and how XAPI plays in with that. We're lining up some real-world, fully implemented case studies for the 11th of November. And then I have reached out to each of the project teams asking them to submit demos for the 18th. So I'm really excited to, as usual, we wrap up the XAPI cohort with project team demos. And then we have the XAPI party, we'll talk about that in a little bit, on December 10th, where we have an opportunity for extended demos. But now what I'd like to do is I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to invite Sae to the stage here. And I'm actually really looking forward to this presentation. So thank you much. And I am going to get out of your way, Sae.
Well, thank you so much for the intro, and thank you for the invitation. I appreciate all of you out there in the audience, either live or in the recording, listening to this. As mentioned, I'm going to be talking about XAPI and friends, and why it should matter to you. Just a quick bio. I think my bio is somewhere out in the ether. It's on the interwebs somewhere. But my name is Sae. I'm the director of the Advanced Distributed Learning Initiative, the government group who help develop and maintain XAPI and its friends. And so you can learn a lot more about it at our website. But for now, let's talk about the good stuff. Let's talk about XAPI and friends and how the standard fits in the larger learning ecosystem. Okay, wait, let's start with unpacking what is learning ecosystem. So that implies that we are going to the future learning ecosystem, the information age of training and education, where everything is new and shiny. And that is in contrast to the old way that we used to do training and education, the industrial age. In other words, that slow way of doing the time-based and episodic training and education, right? Where training and education is tied to your age or your grade or how many weeks you sit in a seat. That it is very assembly line like. You go to first grade and then you go to second grade and you go to third grade, and goodness sakes, you better not be deviant at all from the standard average that model, because it's not working for you otherwise. It is a one-size-fits-all approach to doing the training and education that is input focused. In other words, we focus on designing the curriculum, or we focus on really figuring out those training objectives, or how much time somebody should be sitting in a seat, versus looking at the outcomes of the students and how they're performing and what they need. It tends to be more passive for the students, sitting there in receive mode as they get that instruction. And it tends to be more focused on the facts or psychomotor skills. Now, of course, I will freely admit that this is a bit hyperbolic. I know there's a lot of great training and education out there, that everything is not this old school industrial age version before XAPI or before the future learning ecosystem. But for the sake of comparison, go with me here. So that's the old way of doing things, and we don't want to do it anymore. The new way of doing things, right? The future learning ecosystem, the new model, is a lifelong continuum, recognizing that training and education, learning and development goes across our entire lives. It's interconnected. It's not just one experience here, a separate experience there, a third experience here, but it's in a full arc of learning. It's personalized to individuals' needs and requirements and focused on their actual performance and behaviors, with active engagement from the student side, as well as a focus not only on psychometrics or on declarative knowledge, but on the full comprehensive 21st century competencies. And this is what we refer to as the future learning ecosystem, where that's the concept that I'm talking about that we're building towards. And of course, I probably don't need to tell you all why this is necessary. I mean, if you're in an XAPI cohort, you probably already understood that the way that our technology exists today is enabling this notion of this interconnected Ender's Game-like learning continuum where we can leverage advanced technologies and data-driven analytics and other kinds of automation and AI to truly optimize training and education. Similarly, we are at a place in brain science research and in cognitive studies where we truly understand, well, at least compared to previous decades, so much more about how to develop expertise and how people learn. So combining that with the advanced technologies is a no-brainer. Further, we have all of these operational demands. Now, I come from a Department of Defense angle, so I talk about, like defense demands, but you can look across any sector, healthcare, business, anything, and you can see that the demands upon people are expanding. Every person is expected to know so much more and to be so much more agile about staying up on the latest technologies and the latest postures and policies. And so we just always have to be learning. That leads into something that the folks at Harvard like to call the 60-year curriculum. This is a recognition that from the age of about 15 to the age of about 75, you're probably going to have 6 to 7 careers, not just jobs, but full-on different careers. And you're going to have to constantly be learning new technologies, new techniques, and growing over the course of your entire 60-year curriculum. And further, as AI becomes more prevalent in all of our lives, we're going to need to adjust how we operate as individuals so that we can have that AI human teaming. In other words, it's again that constant learning so that we're prepared for the future. So if you combine these different factors across the real world today, the technology, the learning science, and also all of the demands being placed upon people to learn and develop across their lives, it's a no-brainer that we need to evolve the way we do training and education across society, certainly across our organizations. And so that's where the learning ecosystem comes into play. Let me show you a short video about what this might look like. Now, again, I come from the Department of Defense, so it's going to have a little bit of a defense spin on it. But if that's not your thing, you can imagine this as other kinds of different organizations, because I think this is a story that is repeated again and again and again. So in this video here, you see a soldier, and she's going to start with doing a little bit of at-home self-development. In other words, she's reading some assigned reading. So she's here on her ebook doing some assigned reading, and it has XAPI in the background, right? So it's able to see, oh, I see what you're doing. I see you're doing reading. I'm going to update your learner profile. And I'm going to increase your competency estimate on military ethics because I see you've been reading about it. And she recognizes here in her little heads up learner profile that she forgot to do her homework for an upcoming exercise. So she's going to hop on to her VR at-home distributed learning activity. She's going to find a buddy to come do it with her. So enabling that social learning across the ecosystem. So having this flexibility of ebook to VR, individual to social learning, all of it interconnected. And of course, XAPI running in the background so that we can start to get the performance scores out of it. So it's not just check the box, somebody showed up, but we get those real articulated scores.
Whoa. What did you think about that final story?
That was awesome, especially when we got to practice on our own.
What was your rating?
Check this out. Here we go.
Nice.
Yeah, what'd you get? Oh, very nice.
I wonder who our third teammate is.
Looks like we're waiting on an assignment from our trainer.
So you can see that the systems are not replacing the humans, but rather enabling better control by the decision makers. In this example, the decision maker is selecting the most appropriate competencies and then building an optimum team based upon the coverage of those capabilities. And so you can again see where we're enabling this integration of training and education, but
Here's
also
our
talent
new
management.
assignment. I know this guy. He's great. We're gonna have a good team.
So again, seeing the seamless flow. Here, there's that exercise that they were preparing for. They're going to use some nondescript neurophysiological sensors. Again, this is just to show you all the different things that you could be getting those XAPI statements out of, right? So they're getting biometric data while they're getting their real-time performance data as they do their cybersecurity exercise. And so you can imagine XAPI throughout the whole back end here, collecting the data, whether it be from the sensors or from the simulator or from the pre-training activities, integrating all of those data together to give us a better picture about the capabilities of each individual and team. And then being able to leverage those data to help inform things like HR, or in this case, unlocking her and her team's promotions at work. So this is the vision of the future learning ecosystem. It's the interconnected, data-driven training and education pipeline across our entire continuum of learning. And that's what we're trying to get to. That's actually the big project right now that we're working on here at the ADL initiative. And the question, of course, you might be asking is, okay, I saw a lot of love, so thank you, by the way. I noticed that. So this is like cool, right? Like this is cool. I would do this, but how do we get there? Like that's a lot to get to, right? So there's a few steps we can take to get there, and XAPI is at the core of it. So let's go. First thing we all got to do to start to get to this vision of a continuum of learning across all of our training and education, across all of our different organizations, across all of our different functional areas, is we have to have a continuum of learning. Or in other words, stop building learning islands. All right, so here's what I mean. So imagine this is your training activity or your educational experience. It could be a course, it could be some courseware on a learning management system, it could be a mobile app, it could be a whole curriculum at a university, whatever it is. What do you know about the students today as they come into your class? Usually not very much. And what do you do with the data after they leave your sphere of influence? A lot of times it's like, drop the mic, I'm out of here. So instead, what if we started to have more like a relay race where we passed the data from this training event to that educational experience to this mentoring event to your training activity, and then you went ahead and started to pass it on beyond there as well? Maybe not only within your organization, maybe reaching out to, that university that somebody went to, maybe even reaching out to some informal learning, like you saw in the video, somebody reading an ebook or somebody watching certain videos on YouTube. Maybe even things like mentorship or on the job performance or even life experiences, right? You can capture and give credit for experiences using XAPI. So these are all different ways we could start to value the types of background and experiences people bring and start to have more information about them for our larger continuum of learning. Now, of course, this is a lot, right? There's a big picture here. We don't have to do all of this all at once. But even if we just start to do a little bit more, that's going to help us move down the road here. So hopefully I've convinced you not to build learning islands. We're going to connect all of our learning islands together, but there's a problem. How do we make sure that the apples that I'm building on my learning island are going to work with the oranges you're building on your learning island? Or in other words, how do we make sure that the way I describe training and education content and the way I describe jobs in my organization and the way I describe or define individuals' learner worker profiles, that we're always speaking the same language? We need to have a common currency across all of these different systems, organizations, and other kinds of data silos. Well, I mean, I guess today within training and education, we sort of have a common currency, but it's input focused. We use the Carnegie credit hour, right? How many hours was your butt in a seat? Let's use that as our common currency. That's not great. Right? We need to have an outcome focused common currency that is going to work across all of our systems. And of course, what I'm talking about here is competencies and associated credentials. Let me define what that means. Credentials are easy. Credentials are some authoritative body has come in and said, yes, I assert, I confirm, I promise that this person or this team has these competencies. So a credential is just some way of having your competencies asserted.
Say, all of a sudden, I don't hear you. Okay, you're working on it. All right, everybody, Say's working on it. Hang tight. This is why we love technology. Actually, I will say, looks like Sae has lost connection, so we will rejoin her, but just as soon as she can. One of the, I'm going to say, unfancy things that XAPI does that SCORM doesn't, but it's entirely apropos right now, is XAPI can keep track of data that happens offline and then transmit it later on when you come back online. And so that's something that SCORM doesn't like at all. In fact, if you've been an LMS administrator for any amount of time, you will know that when people have crummy internet connections, they don't get to complete their training, right? Or they complete their training, but that e-learning doesn't send that message back to the LMS. So we're going to let Sae rejoin us, but what I'm going to ask, I wonder if there's any of the project teams that are ready with a quick report out that we could use to fill. Oh, maybe Sae's here. So as Sae comes back, do we have you?
Can you hear me?
We do, yes.
I don't know what happened. It just like all of a sudden stopped. But like you said, this is what happens when you have live demos on real technology. So, we all just got to be flexible.
We love it. All right. We see your slides. I'm going to
get
out of the way.
Yeah, it's all good. Well, thank you for filling in. Sorry, guys. I don't know. But, it is what it is. Did you finish your thought? Shall I keep going?
Keep going. You're up.
All right. So as mentioned, so we have credentials where an authoritative body says, yes, I believe this. Competencies are a definition of somebody's capability. Now, you probably already know knowledge, skills, attitude, abilities, other things like that. And of course, that's part of competencies. Also, competencies include all the other things that are below the iceberg. So ideally, you want to define everything comprehensively, all of those 21st century competencies. Additionally, competencies are defined at different levels of performance, usually at the 5-level Dreyfus and Dreyfus model. So these are defined observable behaviors, usually tied to a task or a job, that are articulated comprehensively. So that's what competencies are. Competencies, of course, kind of are tied to training and education outcomes. The next thing we need to do, so if you're tracking, we're on number 3 now. The next thing you need to do is all about data. And specifically what I mean is we need interoperable training and education data. And what I mean is we need to build the backbone for this learning ecosystem. We need the internet of learning things, so to speak, so that we can all be training and educating across a larger continuum of learning, but not all going to the same university or the same organization. More specifically, what I mean is that we need to build out a modular open systems architecture, an enterprise architecture, so that all of the different training and education systems that are out there can plug into it. What I'm talking about, of course, is APIs and data standards that allow us to exchange training and education information across this larger heterogeneous system of systems. And from a government standpoint, this is something that the Government Accountability Office and the Senate and others have been saying that we need to do for quite a while. So this is the Lego block approach. In other words, it's about defining those little circles where our systems fit together. It's about defining those interfaces and those data standards. Specifically, we're starting with 4 data standards that we're focused on, a 4-pillar data strategy. It starts first with being able to exchange data about the outcomes of learning activities or other kinds of experiences. Outcomes and behaviors. Does that sound interesting or familiar? In addition, we also need to have information about what it is that somebody's experiencing. What was that course about? What was that training exercise focused on? What were the training objectives? What was the experience that somebody had on the job? Similarly, we need to know what people actually know about themselves, right? What's somebody's skill in cybersecurity or statistics or any number of topics. And that common currency again. How do we make sure we're always talking apples to apples across all of these other 3 pillars, as well as across the big diversity of systems that are out there? Now, in each of these areas, we're working on a data standard that goes with it. You may be familiar with the first one here, right? XAPI enables us to get that runtime data out of all the different systems. Also, we're working with the IEEE, the same group that does XAPI, the Learning Technology Standards Committee, to build out the learning activity metadata. So this is the whole set of ways that we describe different learning activities in an interoperable way, and the way that we describe enterprise learner records. And finally, the reusable competency definitions, the way we describe and define competencies from a data-centric approach. And so that is all part of what we call our total learning architecture, which is the blueprints, the specifications for how you can build out these components within your own learning ecosystem, how you can build your Lego block castle and connect it to the larger set of Lego block castles on that big green Lego block on the bottom. This is how it looks. And again, this is showing you our instantiation of how it all fits together. Maybe yours looks different, but generally speaking, this is how all of those different pieces go together. You have all of your different training and education systems out there today, right? And like I said earlier, mainly these are siloed from one another, right? We generally do not share data from the simulator to the e-learning system to the digital gradebook. And maybe you do that within your organization, but usually we don't do that very well. We certainly don't do it well across organizational boundaries. What's worse, a lot of times, even if you've collected really, really good data about somebody's performance in, let's say, an e-learning system, once somebody leaves that experience, a lot of times we just throw out their data. We're like just losing all that digital gold that we could instead be leveraging to improve training and education. So what we're trying to do is take all of these different learning record providers and use XAPI to be able to take those very granular performance data and save them at a local level. First at a noisy learning record store, and then at a local transactional learning record store. So we're having these linked learning record stores. And as you go from the noisy kind of runtime one to the local, still pretty noisy, pretty messy learning record store, each time you filter up, you make the data a little cleaner and a little more accessible, a little bit more usable. You would have multiple of these across an organization, and then they would feed up filtering through a master object model, filtering through an XAPI profile to get to a higher level organizational learning record store. This has just the good stuff, the stuff that's going to be more applicable beyond just one learning experience or one particular kind of learning technology, but still having that chain of custody, that full data lineage back to the original data, so you can always go back and interrogate it if you need to, and so that the original data owner is still the original data owner. So this is more of a copy or a translation of it versus passing it to some other place. We're exposing it up across a data fabric then to do the, the transformation, the data tagging, the cleaning, and other kinds of wrangling, as well as linking those data up to linked data such as a competency registry. So we all can point to these immutable IRIs that then are a single source of truth for how we define competencies. So we are always having that apples to apples comparison, right? So we're always having that same Rosetta Stone that we're using to describe the semantic interoperability. Similarly, for us on the DoD side, we're going to have that single source of truth for identity, right? So we can identify people's, specific individual identity, credential, and access management. On the society-wide side, there's a whole lot of other efforts that are focused on how do we do that. Could be email addresses, it could be identity at a national level, whole lot of things going on there, but we still have to have some way to identify the actor, right? And then also, of course, some way to aggregate those data for use, whether it be by the individual themselves or by their leaders or by their instructors, or in our case, by enterprise systems for, let's say, organizational planning or other kinds of analytics. All of this links to an enterprise course catalog because we need to know what it was that people were performing on. And so the enterprise course catalog is similarly built in this bottom-up federated system approach, taking all of those local course catalogs and other registrar systems and using a little metadata bot, a little scraper to go in and scrape all of those existing systems, whether they be SQL databases, Oracle databases, spreadsheets, PDFs, whatever, scrape them, get them into that right interoperable data format, right? So we're not depending on humans to type in all this data, and then expose that up through an API. And then, those data become now immediately usable in a way they weren't before for local kinds of analytics or local kinds of automation. But they're also exposed up across the larger enterprise, linked to that common source of truth. So again, all speaking the same language about the content, and exposed up for us through an enterprise course catalog. In other words, a one-stop shop where people within DoD can go to find all of the available training and education courses. So making it really easy for people to navigate across their different opportunities. And finally, to tie a bow on all of this, it's not enough to just have the data unlocked and available. We also have to have a workforce that's ready to be able to use those data. In other words, I mean all of you, right? We need to not only have skill in pedagogy and andragogy and understanding learning science. Those things used to be good enough, maybe, but we also, of course, need to understand learning experience design, the full comprehensive experience of not only the learning, but the environment, the technology, people's emotions, the pieces that go into it. Of course, we need to know learning analytics and understand how learning data plays into all of this so we can leverage it effectively. And of course, we need to understand the technology piece. We need to think about how humans and technology integrate effectively together and all of the other pieces in between, right? So we really have to start to shift our mindsets to enterprise mindsets and to thinking comprehensively and systems thinking. So it's a lot. And there's a whole new field forming around this called learning engineering. And so that's the kind of evolved discipline of like instructional systems design or learning science, kind of the next generation that starts to integrate all of these pieces. So in summary here, I just want to highlight that first, you need to stop building learning islands. And you guys are taking the first step on that, right? You're here talking about interoperable data. And so that's part of the way you do it. Step one is you integrate XAPI, and that allows you to start to pass the baton of information. First, getting out the data from your system and your runtime performance, but then starting to evolve that into translated competencies and eventually to learner profiles so that we can start to have that interconnected learning ecosystem. Of course, second is that we have to move to that competency-based approach because it's not enough if you pass the baton and say, hey, Megan scored 70% on my quiz. Well, what does that mean? Your quiz on what? My quiz on leadership. What does leadership mean, right? Like we need to be able to have that disambiguation or that semantic interoperability of our data. And of course, XAPI profiles help take us part of that way, but it's not enough. We have to start also integrating the competency piece and a few other elements to get us to that true semantic interoperability. Third is we need to build the data backbone. XAPI is the first step in the process, but there are those other pieces as well, as I mentioned. I did highlight 4 specific areas that we're focused on first, but there'll of course be other ones as well. But there's going to be a series of different data specifications as well as kind of business rules that are going to be necessary for all of this to work together. The thing is that we can all modernize incrementally. It doesn't have to happen all at once. First step in that is XAPI. Second step is starting to get to the semantic interoperability elements and starting to build out some of the other course metadata. And finally, we need to make sure that we're all constantly leveling up our workforce, ourselves included, so that we can have this learning engineering mindset for the future. I wanted to give you guys a few resources here at the end before I open up to questions. First, we wrote out this strategy on how to build a future learning ecosystem in a very long book. You can access this book. It is Creative Commons. Please take it, reuse it. It's free for you, and it outlines a very comprehensive science and technology roadmap to make this happen. If you are more interested in just, hey, I just want the details on how this works, first, here's that video I showed. If you want to show it to other people, please do. It's on YouTube. Again, feel free to reuse it. Spread the word. If you are on the technical side, you can go here and you can actually see our system administrator guide on how to build out what I was just showing on those cartoon diagrams. I mean, it's pretty detailed. Like, it gets into like, this is how you configure Keycloak, and this is how you start to integrate your Kafka streams so that you could federate your LRSs. So, this is for the real tech folks out there. But the point is, it's real. It's stuff that you can actually go get. And toward that end, by the way, most of the things I showed on those slides are all open source, including the source code, which is on our GitHub page. So I encourage you to go there and check it out and download or contribute to those repos. If you are a Department of Defense or a security person, or if you're involved in government at all, I just want to highlight that the work that we just discussed is actually supporting these variety of different strategies for digital and data modernization across the Department of Defense, and in particular across the personnel and readiness enterprise. So in other words, this is really good stuff that it's not just my good idea. A lot of other people say it too. And finally, you can go here to our website. That's the URL. And on our website, like I said, you can find our GitHub page here with all sorts of stuff. You can go into our R&D projects, for example, and find like the open source learning experience provider being developed here under the course catalog, videos about how these systems actually work, links to the Learning Technology Standards Committee working group if you want to get involved with the standards development, and lots of other stuff. So with that, I will end my presentation. I think I have about 5 minutes or so left for questions. And so I would love to hear what your thoughts are. Thanks, everyone.
We've got some questions. Thank you so much, Sae. And I'm here with my paper copy of the book.
Excellent.
Honestly, it was worth paying for it, because for me, this is going to be easier than reading a PDF of that thickness. But fabulous work, and tons of good stuff. Couple of questions. So Richard asks, who owns the learner data in this?
See, that's a really good question. And it's going to depend on organizational policies. So for a DoD perspective, for DoD issued training and education, then it's going to be an organizational asset, right? And that's a little bit easier because DoD, of course, has some uniquenesses. But what about regular people who are out there on a job, and they may be working at an organization, taking some classes at a university, and of course, doing their own training and education, like taking some MOOCs or whatever. Who owns their data? That's a really good question. And there's, by the way, there's a lot of folks who are working on that right now. My belief, okay, so if I have to predict what I think is going to happen, I think it's something along these lines. I think you're going to end up seeing some GDPR-like privacy regulations come out that are going to affect the organizational and academic sectors. In other words, those organizations will have permission to use the data within certain confines, and people can probably opt out, but those organizations will probably keep and be able to use the people's data that is generated within that organization or offered freely to that organization, within permission, I suspect. People also, I think, will have their own learner wallet And there's a whole bunch of organizations that are working on building these out. So it'll be your own little like learner profile that you keep your data for. And I suspect it'll be some sort of like, some sort of like distributed ledger probably, that you own, and you are self-sovereign of your data. And if I want to really get out there, what I think is probably going to happen is that you will be able to then sell your data or give your data to organizations and maybe get microtransactions back as a result for that. And then you could expose your data up. For example, like you could give your data to like a LinkedIn or something and give them permission to use it. And then you get like, a few pennies here and there for them processing it. And over time, we have this digital ecosystem around learner records / privacy. This is my thought, but we'll see. I will say that our team is working on something called a privacy API, so that your privacy settings can follow your data. Because think about it, you're going to be interacting with a bunch of different systems. You can't go into like 50 million systems and set your privacy settings. There's way too many gotchas, right? And people just don't do it. So this is work that's being done by Clemson. Really, really good stuff. And so I encourage you to go check it out on our website if you want to see some reports on how that might work in practice. It's on the website too. So there you go.
Super cool, Sae, and I think you actually also answered Martin's question in the process.
Good.
Ryan, I'm just working on them top to bottom. This may be a little bit more granular than you're able to answer, so feel free to.
Okay, let's see.
Here's the
Try to
question.
stump me. It's okay.
Is there any local progress on the future learning ecosystem within specifically the Michigan National Guard?
Okay, that is very, very specific. So I don't know the Michigan National Guard, but what I can say is, first of all, if you are from the Michigan National Guard or you know those folks, feel free to direct them our direction. My program's work actually does span across DoD to include the National Guard. And so we actually can have direct liaison with them, and we can invite them into our working groups and otherwise help serve them. So yeah, sorry, that's a little bit of a stretch for me to know specifically on the state level, but feel free to point them in our direction if we can be helpful.
Awesome. Say the next question is from Khalid. Will XAPI data be shared among all LMSs worldwide one day, like Coursera, edX, Udemy?
Yeah, I think that's an easy one. I think the answer to that is probably no. And the reason is, again, firstly, okay, let me scoot back. There's like a few reasons why I'm going to say no to that one. First, I don't think LMSs are going to be around by the time we get to all of this. What I think is going to be around are the different components that LMSs do, broken up into separate microservices that are actually separate applications. So you're already seeing that, right? Like you don't need to have a learning record integrated with your LMS, right? It's actually better in a lot of cases to have it as a separate component. So all right, so that was a little bit nuanced and like nerdy, but really getting to more of your point is, do I think that everybody across the world is going to happily just share data with all their competitors? No, I don't think so. But I do think that you will see sharing agreements out there. And it's just like what you see in tech, right? There are different technology companies that share data with each other, right? And but you can see them forming into little clusters. So I definitely think that will be the case. I think that there will be certain universities that share data more broadly. There will be some more for-profit organizations that are more, more protective of their data. I think there's probably going to be a good fight about, and in fact, there already is, about self-sovereignty and about people owning their own data and being able to have more control over who else uses it. So these are all things to watch. Is it feasible that all of the different learning technologies that are out there could be connected together into one big learning ecosystem, one big data fabric? I mean, I guess technically speaking, it's feasible. I doubt that it would happen, human nature wise.
Yeah. Oh, we're humans. We're still around. So yeah, and I also see industry associations and accrediting bodies being a big component of defining both the competency models as well as being a key part of some of the data sharing. So
yeah, there's a Chamber of Commerce project called the T3 Innovation Network, and they're doing some great work on data harmonization across all different data standards as for training and education, but also for jobs and workforce and like Department of Labor and competencies and credentials. And so, there really is a lot of impetus of people across all different sectors moving in this direction. it's going to take some time, but I do think this is where things are going.
Super, super cool. And last is, do you see any crossover with the auto industry?
So okay, that's an interesting question. Well, okay, this is my prediction in general. I think all of our different functional silos are going to be interconnected from a data standpoint at some point in the future. In other words, so the Navy, for example, has a really great project that they're working on where they're taking training and education data and mixing it with logistics data. So specifically like training and education related to people who do like maintenance, so that when, like, let's say a part changes on a particular ship, that indicates that this training over here has to change. And then somebody's competencies, if they were trained on the old version, then they need to get it updated to be able to work on the new version. And so you can see where like those systems where logistics and training might not obviously go together, but when you say it, you're like, oh, well, yeah, obviously you need to make those go together. And then you can start to expand that out. So like, how about, facilities? Well, I need to know how many people can fit in this facility so that I can schedule the training, so that I know who needs to really be there versus who can do it virtually because they're already mostly trained. And so if I continue this story, eventually I get to automobiles. Now, I don't know how. I mean, I guess I could make up something, but once we start to unlock the data, there's going to be so many opportunities to use it advantageously or to use it badly, right? So I think that that's very feasible. I think it's up to all of us, by the way, to help influence the narrative on how that works. One of the questions I always get when I talk about this is people look at this and they go, oh my gosh, privacy. Oh my gosh, security. There could be all sorts of issues. People could use those data for bad things. Like people could use them to start to, force people out of organizations or put them into bad jobs or all sorts of other things. And like, that's true. If we're not careful, there are all sorts of bad things that could happen. But I would also argue that IT systems are moving towards data-centric approaches. So the question is, do we want to be part of the narrative and do we want to be part of the decision-making body on how those data are used and how we put controls in place? Or do we want to wait for all the IT people to come in and then retrofit our systems and then tell us what's going to happen? And of course we don't. So I realize that this is a lot. There's going to be a lot of complexity. There's going to be a lot of like policy challenges. There's going to be a lot of ethics that we need to work through that are probably going to be brand new and probably emergent that we won't even predict until later. But I think this is the right journey, and I think that we all want to have a seat at the table.
Yeah.
So with that, again, I appreciate the time. You know how to get a hold of me. I'm very easy to find, and please come join us at ADL in our working groups or other activities.
Fantastic.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sae, and it was good to see you again. I think I need to stalk you and invite you to things in order to hang out with you. So I'm glad this worked out really well. And we're going to switch gears, everybody, to team updates. So thank you, and Sae,
Bye, everyone.
If you wanted to interact in the chat, you can do that. But I think we covered the meaty questions. So let's see who we've got on deck. Martin, do you want to bring a update today for your projects? Let us know what projects you're working on and a quick update, knowing that for all the updates that we have, we've got 12 minutes left.
Hello.
We got it.
Can you, audio? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I'm just switching to my, so much for quick. Wait, there it is. Okay, so we've been continuing to make sure our CMI5 and player, the CTS, all of those installations are working, and we're now starting to try and test some projects on it. What we're looking for is if people have projects that they have, like courses that they would like to see, like, and has something unique, like media or, some kind of interactivity. If they have something they would like to try, then and that's something that, of course, they can share, that would be good to share. So we're going to try doing that. We're working on our demo. We've got a bunch of people submitted all their goals. So we're now going to say, okay, how do we merge this into one demo? what are the other kinds of things? There's a bunch of, we've got tasks. One of the problems is our meeting comes after this, so it's sort of like to be right up to date. It'd be better to have it before. But anyways, so we're still working, things are going well, things are working the way we expected, and we're now getting into sort of the meat of it, I guess is my simple update.
Very cool. And so when you say you want courses from people, you want CMI5 published courses that you can test, or not CMI5?
If they were written in Articulate or like in a program that can export to CMI5, but they haven't got a place to test whether their CMI5 will work, then send them to us or join us and we can test it there. So we could see what it looks like when it's running in CMI5. Like they've been exporting to SCORM all along, but their authoring environment can export to CMI5. And I'm not sure all of the different ones that can and can't. But that's sort of what we're looking for. If people want to try out their things and just see what they look like, or if there's bugs that show up or whatever, that's kind of what we're looking for. And the next stage we want to do is actually do what some of the things that CMI5 offers is to actually run something on a mobile or in a desktop app that's not in an LMS, not in a website. So that's the next thing after this, but we're also working on that.
Very, very cool. Awesome. Awesome. I know Domino does publish out to CMI5, so that's another source of content for you. All right. Thank you, team CMI5 testing. I know you have a big complex name for that. Brian, what are you and your teams updating? You're bringing a couple updates, right?
Yep.
Awesome.
So this is Brian Duck, Team XAPI Profiles last week. We were able to meet at 6 p.m. after the meeting, after the live session, and we'll be meeting again tonight at 6 p.m. We reviewed and compared the Navy Common Reference Profile PDF document with the associated profile in the XAPI profile server. We have published a link to the YouTube version of the meeting if people want to see that comparison. And then we also talked through the idea of publishing a primer, a document that's a reference to how to get started with profiles, what to look at, which servers to use, what information is seen as getting started, and sort of how to start beyond just picking and choosing vocabulary items. So the idea is that you'd start from a base and you'd build up to the most specific industry-specific items. So that is actually the profile primer is actually up in GitHub, as well as being posted to our Slack channel. And we're asking for feedback on that. And I expect the part of the meeting tonight will be to review that document and get feedback on it. And then the other thing is that document is built on a Word document that was provided to us by Jason Haig. And Jason asked that we share that document, that we share what he refers to as the human readable template for XAPI profiles. And he is actually going to propose within the IEEE that be considered as a document as a baseline standard for human readable implementation of profiles. So again, that's what we accomplished this week. Areas where we may need support, we're going to be asking Jason to review that document. We're interested in feedback from anybody in the cohort as well. And as I mentioned, tonight's meeting, we're going to talk about the profile primer, and then we're going to outline our presentation plans for the demo day and the XAPI party. Thank you.
Awesome. So happy to hear that you're planning on both demo day and XAPI party. Is there anybody from the Team Storyline Beginner Group here today? I didn't see Ilona in the group online. They are making some progress, so let me share what they are up to. They are starting to experiment with sending their statements and whoops, wrong screen. And looking for just some basic instructions. I know Matt Cleaver has been giving some support as well, and they have been checking out some tutorials. So their goal for next week is actually to get some statements up to the LRS and be ready to rock and roll there. Oh, you weren't seeing that anyways. Well, never mind. I wanted to remind you then for next week, and we've had a few people mention it, but we've got next week the, let's share my screen and do this right this time rather than talk while I do that. All right, so good stuff to know. Next week, Izzy Lara will be joining us and talking about data governance, which I like to think if we're thinking about our data in a Lego system environment, I like to think of governance as how we keep track of the sizes and colors of everything and use it in an organized way so that when we bring in a new data source or a new data use, it's not introducing chaos into our system, right? The goal is that as we get more and more data, we're able to use more and more data as opposed to have a bigger mess. So that will be next week. XAPI Party, December 10th. It is online, of course. XAPI Party is in some ways a really great way to capstone an XAPI cohort project. You get a few more weeks after cohort ends to put the finishing touches. You get a longer period than you'll have on the 18th to demo. So you get a full 20 or in some cases 45 minutes to demo your project, what you started with, what you learned, what your team members learned, and your finished product. Even if your finished product isn't fully baked and finished, right? You only had 12 weeks, and everybody's a volunteer here. So that's kind of a really nice capstone for your cohort experience. And those of you who are considering doing presentations, presenting at conferences, those kinds of things, that then becomes, we record it for you, you get speaking cred, right? And add that to your CV as an emerging speaker. So that's something that I feel very passionate about as part of your professional development, not just your learning here at Cohort. The other cool thing that we have at XAPI Party is all sorts of conference presentation. So we call it XAPI Party if you're new. We call it a party, but it's actually a conference. Our first ones were in crummy weather in Michigan, and we figured the best way to get people to come to Michigan when the weather was crummy was to call it a party. And so the XAPI Party is really a free full-day conference with lots of sessions. If you've got something that is related to XAPI, but that's not related to your cohort presentation, by all means, go ahead and I'll be reaching out soon with a call for proposals to get people to join us for that. So with that, oh, you know what? I'm sorry, I didn't see. We do have an update from Team Storyline. Would you like to come to the stage and join us? I did not see that. I'm so sorry I missed it by the time I was screen sharing. All right. So, oh, okay. I'm sorry. You're on a mobile device and not able to join. So I'm sorry. Well, I'm glad we got a little bit of your update. Anybody who is experienced in XAPI and wants to hop in and help the Team Storyline folks with any of their technical questions, then by all means, go in and do that. That would be a really nice cohort thing to do. So, all right, everybody. Thank you so much. Go out and make something awesome and then share it with the community. And we will see you next week. Bye, everybody. And thank you very much, Jess Jackson, for all that you have done for the XAPI community, for making it fun, accessible, and providing a vision that we can all follow. So thank you so much for your collaboration on this, and you will be sorely missed.